So this is Dr. J. Smith, and back again is our good friend Mel. You all know Mel, that smiley face. He's supposed to be on vacation. He refuses to do so. He's so excited by what has happened. And I think what really perked up his energy was what happened with the video we have just put up with Paul from London. And Paul is one of those discoveries by Mel, well, or both, but Paul came to Mel came to Paul. And the reason why Paul is even known by us is because of the comments. Remember, we've always said we love your comments, and the ones that are serious, we want to get a hold of. We want to run with you. It turns out that Paul has been working on this particular thesis, this Jerusalem thesis, for 3 years. That's an awful long time. Now, does he have a degree in this? No, he doesn't. Does he need a degree? No, he doesn't. For people, just stop and think. For those of you who are Muslim, did Muhammad have a degree? No, he didn't. Did he even know how to read and write? No, he didn't. Yet every one of you is listening to Muhammad. And in the same token, it tends to be the people who don't have the degrees who actually go out and do the research, like Dan Gibson. Does Dan Gibson have a degree? No, he doesn't. Does he know an awful lot more than Dr. David King, who did have a degree, who spent all his time in libraries in London? Obviously, who's done the better work? Well, obviously Dan Gibson did, because he actually went to the places, went to the in situ, and he found his discoveries. That's why people like Paul, lovely guy. First time I met him yesterday, and yet what Paul has put up there, and I just put up earlier this morning, what Paul put up there and what he has done, I have seen no one who has done this yet. No one has bothered to go back to the Jerusalem itself. Now, there are many of you in the comments below are saying, yes, this makes sense. Yes, we've been trying to tell you Jerusalem. Look back at Jerusalem, because everything comes from Jerusalem. Well, Mel has known this for a long time. And Mel, you're on board now, even though you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be enjoying yourself somewhere, hiking and going all over the landscape. You've come back and you're in a hotel room just for this recording, and you want to talk and actually embellish what Paul did yesterday, right? And so what we're going to do, I've asked Mel to just put out his computer. This is the great thing about the technology. You're 3,000 miles away from me. I'm sitting here in my office, and you're in a hotel room. So what you're going to do, Mel, is you're going to actually take off from what Paul did and show you some other ideas, some new material, some other research that also supports the Jerusalem thesis. And we're going to call it that, the Jerusalem thesis. That's what Paul named it. We're going to name it that way, and we're going to continue with this Jerusalem thesis. This is going to be a whole panoply of new ideas that are going to be coming out. This is the first, really, we've only put out about 3 videos on this channel on the Jerusalem thesis, what you and I did with Al-Fadi about a week and a half ago, what Paul did yesterday, and what you're doing now. But I'm hoping we're going to have a whole slew of Jerusalem thesis videos. So over to you, Mel. Help us and bring us back to Jerusalem, and tell us what else you found about Jerusalem, and what else you found about biblical theology, and also what else you found about the Bible itself concerning what now Islam has borrowed. And that's what we're saying. Islam has borrowed almost all of these ideas.
Okay, so obviously we're talking about the Jerusalem thesis, and a big part of that thesis is the Masjid al-Haram and where exactly that is. So according to the Jerusalem thesis, the Masjid al-Haram is to be found on the Temple Mount. And there are lots of good arguments for why that is the case. And these are based on references that we can find in the Bible and how it corresponds to what it says in the Quran. And we can also look at various geographical evidence as well. Now, if we look at reason 1, a very important reason why we can say that it is the masjid on the Temple Mount, it's to do with the link with Abraham. So in Genesis, it refers to Abraham building an altar on Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac upon. It says, "Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." What's really significant is that when we say that word Moriah in Arabic, what do we say? It is Marwa.
Marwa is Moriah.
And so that's a huge link. Now, this will be something I will
what you're saying, Mel, is the pronunciation of Mariah would be Marwa. So it's just the same pronunciation, the same word, but pronounced as an Arab pronunciation would Arab would do it.
Yeah. And something I will cover in a future video is the fact that the Arabs had a big obsession, really, with Abraham for obvious reasons that went back centuries. So this place where Abraham brought Isaac to sacrifice him was hugely significant, not just for Christians, not just for Jews, but it also was significant for these Arabs as well. So this is a very important place. And if we think about the significance of the story, Isaac is a symbol of faithfulness to God. An altar is built and Isaac is put on the altar, and just at the last moment when he's about to obey God to sacrifice Isaac, an angel appears and offers a ram instead of the boy. And obviously when Christians see that story, we see something extra, because we see the figure of Isaac and the figure of the ram as a prefigurement of Jesus, who is the ultimate sacrifice. So this is a very significant story. Yeah.
I'm going to go a picture up here. Here's a picture of the rock itself. This is a picture of what the rock looks like today. And isn't it the tradition, Mel, that this rock is where the sacrifice was of Isaac? This is where he was going to be sacrificed.
Yes, this is the tradition that goes back literally thousands of years. It is one of the most significant locations, and there's lots of markings in that rock. It's actually also the location of the Holy of Holies, where they kept the Ark of the Covenant, and there are various grooves in the very rock, and those that have let's say stewarded that area or looked after it over the centuries have been very careful to keep that rock the way they had it centuries ago, because it was so sacred, so significant.
What the Muslims have done since the Dome of the Rock was then constructed in 691, we're talking about 7th century AD, they then fashioned the story to take away the idea of Abraham and Isaac, and they put it to, this is the rock from which Muhammad ascended the seven heavens. And even some say, if you look carefully, you can see the footprint of Muhammad there, as if he pushed up from there himself, as if he jumped up to the seven heavens. Now, ironically, this is what Islam does with anything, and this is a good way to introduce us. Islam takes what is already there and they introduce their own narrative. They introduce their own story. They introduce that which makes sense. We've just mentioned this a number of episodes ago, where if you go to Mecca today, there used to always be one Jamarat. Now there are 3 Jamarats, and the reason why is because to accommodate the huge crowds that are coming, one Jamarat throwing stones, 49 or 72 stones, you hit too many people. They've had to aggrandize it with 3. But if you go to Mecca today and ask why are there 3 Jamarats, the new narrative, which has just been around since 1980, so we're talking only 40 years, is that those are all to commemorate the 3 times that the devil came to hassle Abraham. There's the new narrative, and it's just come out in the 20th and 21st century. If they're still creating these new narratives, why are we surprised they didn't do the same thing in this case, with the rock, which was where the Temple Mount was, is you're going to say later on, it's where the Holy of Holies was for Jerusalem. I'm sorry, for the Jews. Now it has now become the place that Muhammad went to the 7 heavens.
Yep. Okay, so when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now, if we look at another reason why it's significant, it's the place where Solomon built the first temple. So, as you can see from 2 Chronicles 3:1, then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David. Now, perhaps many of your viewers don't know what a threshing floor is. Perhaps maybe farmers might know what that is. But that's a place where you separated the wheat from the chaff. And obviously that's a very symbolic thing to do, because it's a symbol of the judgment day when God judges the good from the bad, the sheep from the goats. So in Judaism and also in Christianity, it was one of the places that was believed to be where the judgment day would occur and all the people would be gathered at that location. So it's a very significant place. And I think I have said all of that there. So this is the location of the apocalypse. And what's interesting, in Islamic tradition, you see that very belief, the idea that this is going to be the location of the apocalypse. Now, reason number 2 is the idea of the Kaaba itself. The Kaaba is a cube. Well, at least it's meant to be. The word means cube, but I'm sure, Jay, you're aware that the Kaaba that's in Mecca isn't actually technically a cube. It only looks a little bit like a cube, but it's actually a cuboid, perhaps you'd call it.
I'm just going to put the picture up right here. Take a look at the picture. You can see it is really a rectangle. It is not exactly a cube. So why is it being called the cube? Because that's what Kaaba means in Arabic.
But let's have a look at what the original Kaaba was, the original cube. So if we turn to Exodus 26, it talks about the tabernacle in the wilderness. That is like the original temple. And it was essentially a large tent that the Jews would put up, and the Ark of the Covenant was kept in the end of it, in a place called the Holy of Holies. It was a cubic room, as we'll see in a moment, and God's presence was believed to be in there. So if you look at the picture on the right, you can see very clearly that cube shape. And only the high priest could go in there. Okay? So if we take a look at further references, we can see in 2 Chronicles 3:3, we have the dimensions. The portico at the front of the temple was 20 cubits long across the width of the building and 20 cubits high. Now obviously that's two-dimensional, but it suggests a cube, and this is confirmed by another reference elsewhere. He prepared the inner sanctuary within the temple to set the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord there. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. He overlaid the inside with gold, pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. So this is really a slam dunk. The cube, the Kaaba, was originally associated with the Jewish tabernacle. And, you know, many of the viewers may not be familiar. What exactly do I mean by the Ark of the Covenant? Jay, how would you explain the Ark of the Covenant to those who may not be familiar with that?
Well, the Ark of the Covenant is what they would take with them as God's presence with them. Whenever the Jews who were nomadic at that time, they had to move from place to place to place. The Ark of the Covenant is what they would carry, and they would then take that Ark with them so that God's presence went with them from place to place to place.
Exactly. And if I understand it correctly, the 10 Commandments were kept within that box, that ark, and that was the reference to the covenant. So these 10 Commandments were kind of a reminder of God's presence. So obviously a very important place. And so interestingly, in Jewish tradition, the Ark of the Covenant, which is that container where the 10 Commandments were kept, the markings underneath it are still to be seen in that rock on the Temple Mount, because they were eventually kept in the Holy of Holies in the temple on that Temple Mount. So it's really significant. And that links again back to what we spoke about with Abraham and Isaac. Reason 3 is to do with the Hajj, which means pilgrimage. And this is something that Paul covered relatively briefly, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. This is from Deuteronomy 16. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. Now, in the original Hebrew, the name for that is Hag. So Hag HaKatzir, the festival of unleavened bread, Hag HaShavut or Shavot, and Hag HaSukkot. But when we say that in Arabic, that word Hag becomes Hajj. And actually, you got a phone call, you were telling me, from Murad on this very word.
Just a number of, actually, I just about a half an hour ago, you won't believe this. I mean, this is how God works. It's just providential. Murad called me up on using WhatsApp, and he wanted to talk to me about some of the things he's discovering. And he just said that he saw the video that we put up with Paul yesterday, and he said, you know, Jay, that idea of Hajj and hug, you are absolutely correct. It all depends on where you put the dot. If you put the dot above the letter or you put the dot below the letter, it becomes either a G or a J sound. And he says, in places, even today, places like Yemen and in Egypt, the Hajj is still hug. It's still, they're still using the G. Everywhere else, they use the J sound, but they still use the G in those two countries in Arabic. So even today, there is a confusion, or they just agree to disagree that whether it's a G or a J. So this, obviously, the Hebrew hug, what is the equivalent to what has now become in most Arabic-speaking countries, Hajj.
Yep. Now, so if we look at that as well there, with the festival of unleavened bread, they have a sacrifice of a goat, as you can see, but that corresponds also with Eid al-Adha, which happens at the end of Ramadan, if I'm correct. So there's another correspondence. And also, we've mentioned about the G to the J, but what's also interesting is that in terms of Arabic etymology, according to Odin Lafontaine, the word HJJ actually just means to argue in Arabic. So they've borrowed the actual meaning from the Hebrew. It wasn't there in the Arabic. And the other thing which is also interesting is a person who makes the pilgrimage specifically to Jerusalem is called a Hagag, which obviously would be a Hajjaj if we say it in the Arabic way. And we all know who al-Hajjaj is, the person who was Abdul al-Malik's right-hand man. So that is very significant. So what's interesting here, we have the word Hajj. It comes from Hebrew and it was connected with the Temple Mount. And I think these are very good reasons to suppose that this is where the original Masjid al-Haram is. And this is a good part of the argument, I would say. Now, another aspect of this, if we look at the Feast of the Weeks, from the Mishnah, it prescribes circling the temple 7 times on the 7th day. So we see a Hajj, we see the circling, so it's a great match. We're on to reason 4 now, the idea of the house of God. So I'm sure the Christian viewers will be familiar with this. Pretty much in lots of parts of the Bible, it refers to the temple as the house of God. Probably the most common one to most of the viewers would be what Jesus said, my house will be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers. And there's many other references to the house of God in the Bible in reference to the Temple Mount. So if we move on to reason 5, Baca, we find in the Quran the first house created for mankind at Baca, 396. So this is something that Paul mentioned in passing, that it comes from Psalm 84. If you look at the references in bold, they all relate to the Temple Mount. So you have the courts of the temple, you have the altar, you have the reference to the house, and the Valley of Baca is really a symbol of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So that's the link there with Jerusalem once again. I don't know if you want to say something on that, Jay.
Oh, and Paul did bring this up, and this is something we need to underline. I noticed that one or two people in the comments also brought this up. Baca was always a place that you stopped on the way to Jerusalem. It was a rest stop. It was a place to get your energy up before you actually went to Jerusalem, with all that what that entailed. And so Baca is well known in the Bible, and it is not Mecca at all. If in fact there are 3 different references, 3 different places from biblical context where Baca could be. Today, the most popular one would be in Lebanon, the Baca Valley. But certainly, this is so well known in the Bible. To try to assume, Muslims trying to assume that this is Mecca, obviously, you need to look and see. Baca, chapter 3, verse 96, is referring, if the Quran, it is taking the word that is taken straight out of the biblical context of a place as a rest stop on the way to go to the pilgrimage there in Jerusalem.
Yep. Okay. Reason 6 is to do with shaving heads. So obviously, when Muslims go on Hajj, they shave their heads. So an objection might be to a Jewish location is that Jews are not known for shaving their heads as Muslims do on Hajj. You can see a reference to heads shaved in Surah 48:27. So how does that link with the Bible? Well, we find it here. Isaiah 22:12. In that day the Lord God of hosts called to weeping and mourning, to baldness and putting on sackcloth. Well, I'm in good company there. Don't have to do much shaving of the head. But we can see that the early Muslims obviously read the Bible and they decided that that's going to be part of their ritual. Perhaps the rabbinical Jews may have disagreed with them. Maybe they had different customs. But you can see in the picture down there that the Muslims dress entirely in white. And Jay, do you want to talk about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's fascinating. If you look, you've got the picture of the sackcloth there, and then over here you have what they call the ihram, IHRAM. The ihram is what all Muslims use today whenever they do the Hajj. And the reason why, and Muslims are very clear on this, the reason why they take, if you're flying in from another country, you fly into Mecca, before you get off the plane, you're supposed to change into the ihram. And it is just a bland piece of white cloth, not all as one piece that they wear on themselves, so that everyone is equal, that there are nobody there. This is to show a sign of humility before God, that no one is rich, no one is poor, no one is white, black, or any other color. You are all white, one color, one piece of cloth, and therefore there's no distinction between one and the other. That's the meaning that they give today. Now, that comes straight out of Judaism again. The sackcloth that you see in Isaiah 22. The sackcloth is usually exactly the same way. It's to show obedience and it's to show humility before God, so that nobody is any different before God. So even the rich and the poor wear the same sackcloth, and it's very rough. It's not supposed to feel good. You're not, and there's no refinery about it. There's nothing that can show you off, because you are nothing before God. Ironically, the Muslims have taken the same idea that was used there in Jerusalem, and now they've applied it to Mecca, possibly to Petra in between. So that idea that this was something new by Islam, no, Islam has just borrowed what is already there, again, proving that the old Jerusalem thesis that you and Paul and Otto Lafontaine are coming up with is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to look at, okay, we've looked at the biblical reasons, but we're going to look at the geographical ones and the historical proofs for this. So something that you will have seen if you looked at the video on the Temple Mount. We did a video, I think it was about a year ago, on the Dome of the Rock. But you will notice that it's built for circumambulation, walking around it. So that's a key there. But is there a connection between that and Judaism? Obviously, we've seen some references to the idea that Jews circled on the seventh day 7 times. But what about the direction? Is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? Does that correspond? Okay. So in Judaism, the word for circumambulation is hakafah, which means to circle or go around, and it's a Jewish word. A Hebrew word, I should say. So this is the rock that we have referred to with the various markings. As you can see there on Sukkot, the reader's platform is circled on each of the 7 days of the holiday. This spot on the Temple Mount is the exact location of the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was once kept. And also, if you think about the story of Jericho, they walked around that 7 times on the 7th day, and then the walls came crashing down, and they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant as well to boot. And not incidentally, they walk around it anti-clockwise, which is exactly what Muslims do as well. So in Judaism, starting things from the right side is considered to be important, since the right side is the side of chesed, which is kindness, while the left side is the side of gevura, which is judgment. So it's kind of like mercy versus judgment. So that's why Jews go around anti-clockwise. And you can see, once again, the copycats have copied the Jews here. And that reinforces the idea that this is where they've taken their ideas from in Jerusalem, from the Temple Mount.
Well, so this is what we all are looking for. This is what many of the people in the comments are thanking you for, Mel, you and Paul, and Odin. What is his name? Odin LaFontaine?
Yep, Odin LaFontaine.
Odin LaFontaine. The three of you have really worked on this type of material and are coming back and looking and coming out with proof after proof after proof after proof. Now, these are green papers. We're putting them out there as suppositions, but it seems like it's underlying almost everything we've been saying. Islam is nothing. There's nothing original in Islam. We have noticed this. We have known this. We have said this about the Quran itself. That one of the things that we have been saying for years is that so much of the Quran is borrowings from Jewish apocryphal writings written in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, up until the 6th century, and also Christian Syriac Aramaic writings, many of them lectionaries, discussions that were meant to be discussions, never meant to be a literary piece, had them been borrowed and put into a book. But when you take it from the Syriac Aramaic or Aramaic Syriac, you then deform it, and the Arabic then had all kinds of problems because it could not have accommodated, the script could not have accommodated something that was so sophisticated that it was coming out of these lectionaries. Now, what you have done here, you've looked at 7 things. I think there are 7. I think I'm correct on that. You started with Moriah, and here's a picture of the map that Paul put up. Let's just put it up there. So you can see where Moriah is.
Scopus.
There you can see where Scopus is, the 2 different mountains. And you can see where the Kidron Valley is in between. You can even see where Gehenna was. Now, did you notice Gehenna, 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 Gehenna? There's the G and the J, confusion of the G and the J. So Gehenna would be the Hebrew. Gehenna has not been changed to Gehenna. It's still the same idea of hell. So Paul brought that up there as an afterthought in the video we did yesterday. When you look at it, it actually is a straight borrowing out of what the Jews had already done. So that's what's fascinating. You went to Solomon's temple and you looked at the fact that in Solomon's temple you have this threshing idea of and for those who don't know what chaff means, that's the stuff you don't use. You get rid of the stuff that is superfluous and you keep the wheat. So that's why you winnow it, and that's why you, in threshing it, you then take away and let the chaff blow away with the wind, but you keep the wheat because that's what can be usable. That's what is being done there in the threshing floor that's there in the temple. Second thing you brought up was Kaaba, and I love what you did that. Now, Paul did it earlier, but you really, I think, underlined it much better, looking at this idea that the Kaaba is the same word that we would use for cube. And fascinating, looking at what the Muslims have done, they've taken this idea of the cube, but they even keep it to a cube. It's not really a cube. What's the word you give it? What's the name you give it?
A cuboid.
A cuboid.
Cuboid.
But it's not it's not 20 by 20 by 20, as you have saying 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits. The Bible made it very clear that this Holy of Holies that's there at the end of the temple that was there that Solomon built, that is actually a cube. And that's right where the Temple Mount is today. Isn't that fascinating? So that Holy of Holies has now been taken, lifted. They tried to reproduce it, possibly in Mecca. It looks like it, from what Gibson is saying, it was probably there in Mecca. But then it was much more recreated there in the 8th century because in Mecca, and they didn't get it quite right. They didn't get it by 20 by 20 by 20. It's a cuboid. It's not actually square like it should have been, which is probably what happens whenever you try to take something and try to mimic it. You then mock it by mimicking it because you don't get even the dimensions correct. Now, then you went to the third thing, and that is the Hajj. And that's the idea of the G and the J. The G and the J are interchangeable. The Hajj that you have in Hebrew, and you talk about the 3 feasts, they're all there at the temple, are they not? They're all there in Jerusalem. That has been recreated by Islam as the Hajj, which even includes the 7 circumambulations. I'm sorry, going this way. It actually goes anti-clockwise, as we now found. It goes the other direction because it's going towards that which is kind, that which is going towards the kindness rather than the judgment. Interestingly, the Muslims have done the same thing. But ask a Muslim, why 7? How many times have I asked Muslims, why are you going 7 times around? And I've never bothered to ask them, why are they going anti-clockwise? I'm going to do it from here on out. Thanks so much, Mel. Because the Jews did this, because this is what was done in Jerusalem. The fact that you sacrifice there, they have a whole plain for sacrifice there in Mecca today. That was done at the temple. And it was all done at that Temple Mount where now the Dome of the Rock sits. Now, number 4, you then went into the house of God. The house of God is well known in the Bible as the temple. And that's why Jesus drove out the money changer, because how dare you desecrate the house of God in Luke that you put there. And then you went into number 5, Baca, and the idea that Baca is to be Mecca. No, it's not, folks. We know where Baca is. Get it straight. Get your history straight. Get your geography straight. Look and see where Baca is. It's on the way to get to Jerusalem. It was a rest stop that is well known by the Jews. I didn't know this about the shaved heads. Maybe you like it's because your head is bald, but you are right. They do shave their heads. That's right. So why do they do that? Because this is what they did in the Jewish tradition. This is what you do when you go to pilgrimage. You shave your head. What's fascinating too is the ihram, the sackcloth that the Muslims call today ihram is exactly what the sackcloth that they would do on pilgrimage. The Jews, nothing new under the sun. They've just borrowed it. And then, of course, actually, I jumped ahead. The circumambulation going the anti-clockwise, the hakapa that you referred to, is actually what the Muslims have done today. In almost everything we're finding, Islam has done nothing new. There's nothing new in the sun. And stop and think, Mel, when you make up a religion, or when you take that which is already there, and you want to make and retain that which the memory of what people already know, because you do want to retain that. So you want to retain the sackcloth, you want to retain the circumambulation, you want to retain the cube, you want to retain also the Safa and the Marwa, or running back and forth. You want to retain all this. You then take it, but you don't really have any idea why. If you've lost that memory, you're still doing it without even understanding why. And yet today, when I ask Muslims, why is it you don't just go 3 times around the Kaaba? Why don't you go clockwise? Why do you go anti-clockwise? I've never bothered to ask them that question. Muslims just don't seem to know. Even the experts don't seem to know. They keep on saying, well, because Abraham did it. Well, yes, okay. So why do you think, and where do you think all this comes from? It all comes from Jerusalem. It all comes from much further north. In this case, 1,000 miles further north. Petra is 600 miles further north. Jerusalem is 1,000 miles further north from Mecca. Nothing new under the sun. We're now finding exactly how Islam really was recreated. It was a recreation of what had already been. Would you not say that? We're looking at the tradition that was there had to be brought down, had to be Arabized, had to take it away from Jerusalem, even take it away from Petra and bring it down, as the Abbasids had to create their own narrative, their own hegemony, their own identity, and their identity was in Mecca. That's why when you look and see what's there today, these are nothing more than facsimiles, and they don't even have the right dimensions. Well done, Mel. Thank you so much. Any last say for you?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious now that what you had originally was a Fertile Crescent religion that was transposed down into Arabia Deserta. It does not make sense for it to have started in an uninhabited place with no cultural influences whatsoever, almost no population. It clearly all happened up north. We've seen that again and again, no matter what topic we've looked at. The common theme is it's all up north, and that's where we find the origins of Islam.
There you go. And it makes sense. It's all up north because that's where the civilizations were. And that is where the history is. That's where all the coins are. That's where all the rock inscriptions are. That's where all the buildings are. That's where everything takes place because that's where people lived. You only have these traditions where people lived. You only have these traditions where people went. That's why it's so nice and so easy. I was even fascinated that they didn't even know that Abraham lived in Mecca, according to the traditions. According to their tradition, they had him way down 1,000 miles too far south and didn't even know that this was a problem until I said, stop and think, how could Abraham be way down there? How could Abraham be in a deserted place? What in the world was he doing? And coming to visit Hagar, and I thought the guy had traveled 600 miles. No, he hadn't traveled 600 miles. He actually lived there. He had his own house there. He had rebuilt the Kaaba there, which means he grew up there, which means you can start to think, and it just makes your head swirl, how absolutely ahistorical this Islam is. They should never have tried to borrow something that was so intrinsically valuable and so intrinsically historical and so intrinsically based on everything we know. And the archaeology supports almost everything the Bible says. If you're going to take on the Bible historically and archaeologically and geographically and theologically and try to reproduce everything down 1,000 miles further south, be careful what you touch, because we won't argue. The rocks will cry out for us, and the rocks are doing just that. It's the rocks that are crying out for us. It's the archaeological evidence that's coming to light. It's all the inscriptions and all the documents and all the coins and all the, in this case, even the buildings. It's so good. It's so easy, and it's made our job that much easier. God bless you. I really wish you would go on vacation, and you're exhausting all of us, because we would hope that you get some rest, because you've done such a great job, Mel. Thanks for really embellishing and helping what Paul's doing. Paul's going to come back and do a few more with me. We know Joe's going to be coming back, and eventually Murad will be coming as well. God bless you. It's great to have you on the team, and thanks for today.
Thank you. See you later.